He was a military prodigy who conquered the known world by the age of 30, a tactical genius who never lost a battle. He was also a paranoid tyrant who murdered his closest friend in a drunken rage and crucified thousands of captives. So who was the real Alexander? A godlike hero who united East and West? Or a blood-soaked monster who left a scar on history? The story of Alexander the Great is a story of shocking contradictions. He was the man who burned cities to the ground in fits of rage, and whose ambition left a trail of destruction that cost hundreds of thousands of lives. The truth, as it so often is far more complex than any single label. Let's follow his epic journey, examining the moments that defined him as both a military marvel and a monster. We'll unpack the evidence for both sides of his legacy, the visionary and the villain, so you can decide for yourself. To understand the man, you have to understand the world that made him, and the truly formidable father who forged him. His father was Philip II, king of Macedon. Before Philip, Macedon was a rough, semi-barbaric kingdom on the periphery of the Greek world, often looked down on by sophisticated city-states like Athens and Sparta. But Philip changed everything. He was a brilliant military and political reformer. He took the traditional Greek phalanx and supercharged it, lengthening the spears to create the deadly sarissa, a pike so long it created a bristling wall of steel that was nearly unbreakable. He perfected the coordination of infantry and cavalry, creating a combined arms fighting force the world had never seen. By the time Alexander came of age, his father had built the single greatest military machine in the ancient world. But Philip gave his son more than just an army. He gave him an incredible education. For Alexander's tutor, Philip chose none other than Aristotle, the most brilliant mind of the age. For 3 years, the future conqueror studied rhetoric, politics, and science at the feet of the master philosopher. Aristotle instilled in him a deep love for Greek culture, especially the epics of Homer. Alexander supposedly slept with a copy of the Iliad under his pillow, seeing himself as a new Achilles, destined for a heroic fate. This education shaped his worldview, giving him a sense of destiny and a firm belief that Greek civilization was superior, a belief that would fuel his drive to spread Hellenistic culture across the globe. When Philip II was assassinated in 336 BCE, the throne passed to his 20-year-old son. Many of the Greek city-states Philip had conquered saw their chance. They saw a young, untested boy and assumed the Macedonian powerhouse would crumble. They were wrong. Alexander's response was immediate and utterly devastating. When the proud city of Thebes declared its independence, Alexander marched his army south with shocking speed. The Thebans refused to surrender, and he showed the world the first true glimpse of his terrifying capacity for violence. He didn't just defeat Thebes, he erased it. His army stormed the city, slaughtering 6,000 people and selling another 30,000 into slavery. The city itself was razed to the ground. The message to the rest of Greece was brutally clear. Resistance means annihilation. With Greece cowed, Alexander turned to his father's unfinished project, invading the mighty Persian Empire. This was the superpower of the age, stretching from Egypt to India. For the Greeks, Persia was the ancient enemy. Alexander framed his invasion as a grand crusade of revenge. In 334 BCE, he crossed into Asia Minor with an army that was vastly outnumbered. His first major test came at the Granicus River. The Persians held the high ground on the opposite bank. Alexander's most experienced general, Parmenion, advised waiting for a dawn crossing. Alexander refused. In a move that would become his signature, he chose the bold, direct approach. He personally led his elite companion cavalry in a charge straight across the river and up the muddy bank, into the teeth of the Persian defenses. The fighting was ferocious. At one point, an axe shattered Alexander's helmet, and he was only saved from death by his friend, Cleitus the Black, a name we'll hear again under much darker circumstances. Alexander's audacity paid off. The Persian line broke, and the Macedonians won a stunning victory. This sent shockwaves through the Persian Empire, but the Persian king, Darius III, was now mobilizing the full might of his empire. The two kings would meet a year later, in 333 BCE, at the Battle of Issus. Darius had assembled a massive army and chosen his ground carefully, a narrow coastal plain where his superior numbers could force a head-on brawl. But Darius had miscalculated. The narrow battlefield actually worked against him, preventing him from deploying his vast army effectively. The armies clashed, and the Macedonian phalanx held firm. The decisive moment came from Alexander himself. Spotting Darius in the center of the Persian line, Alexander gathered his companion cavalry and launched a desperate, all-or-nothing charge directly at the great king. It was an incredible risk. But as Alexander's horsemen smashed into the Persian center, getting ever closer, Darius did the one thing a king must never do. He panicked. He turned his chariot and fled. The sight of the king abandoning his men shattered the Persian army's morale. The retreat turned into a rout, and the slaughter was immense. The victory was total. Alexander had even captured Darius's entire royal camp, including his mother, wife, and children. In a striking display of his more noble side, Alexander treated the royal family with the utmost respect, a chivalrous act that helped build his reputation as something more than a barbarian warlord. After Issus, instead of marching east, Alexander turned south to secure the coast. This led him to the island city of Tyre, a major Persian naval base considered impregnable. Confident in their massive walls rising from the sea, the Tyrians refused to surrender and mocked Alexander, thinking him powerless. They seriously underestimated his obsessive determination. If he couldn't sail to the city, Alexander decided, he would bring the land to the city. He ordered his men to build a stone causeway, nearly half a mile long, across the sea to the island. For 7 months, his soldiers labored under a constant barrage of arrows and fire. It was an astonishing, almost insane undertaking. But slowly, the causeway reached the walls. When they were finally breached, Alexander's fury at the city's defiance was unleashed. The carnage was horrific. Around 8,000 Tyrians were killed. As a final ghastly warning, Alexander ordered 2,000 of the surviving men to be crucified along the coast. The remaining 30,000 inhabitants were sold into slavery. Tyre showed the world that no wall could stand against Alexander's will, and the price for trying was absolute terror. With the coast secure, it was time for the final showdown. Darius had spent 2 years gathering another, even larger army drawn from the furthest corners of his empire. He chose the wide open plains of Gaugamela in modern-day Iraq. This time, there would be no narrow terrain to hinder his numbers. His vast cavalry and fearsome scythed chariots would have room to dominate. While ancient sources claim Darius had up to 1 million men, modern estimates are closer to 250,000, still outnumbering Alexander's 47,000 by at least 5 to 1. The night before the battle, Darius, fearing a surprise attack, ordered his army to stay awake and in formation. Alexander, dismissing his general's advice to launch that very night attack, famously said he would not steal his victory. He let his men rest while the Persian army stood waiting, growing tired and anxious in the dark. The next morning, October 1st, 331 BCE, the battle began. Alexander advanced his army obliquely to the right, a strange maneuver that forced the Persian left wing to stretch out to counter him, threatening to create a gap in their line. Darius unleashed his scythed chariots, but Alexander was prepared. He'd trained his infantry to open their ranks, creating channels for the chariots to pass harmlessly through, where they were easily dispatched. The charge was a failure. Meanwhile, the relentless oblique advance continued. The Persian left wing kept moving further out, and then, the moment Alexander was waiting for arrived. A gap opened between the Persian left and their center. Alexander had formed his elite cavalry into a massive wedge. Now, he led them in a thunderous charge straight into that gap, wheeling left and driving like a spear tip directly toward Darius himself. For the second time, Darius saw Alexander coming for him, and for the second time, Darius broke. He turned and fled. The news of the king's flight rippled through the Persian ranks, and the massive army collapsed. The victory at Gaugamela was absolute. It shattered the Persian Empire. Alexander was now, without question, the king of Asia. The great cities of Babylon and Susa opened their gates to him as he marched toward the ceremonial heart of the empire, Persepolis. The conquest of Persia was the peak of Alexander's military career. He'd done the impossible. He was master of a vast domain, fabulously wealthy, and hailed by his men as the greatest general in history. But it's here, at the height of his power, that the story begins to darken. The lines between conqueror and tyrant, visionary and despot, began to blur. The immense pressure, the constant threat of assassination, the intoxicating effect of absolute power, and a growing reliance on alcohol started to warp the man. The seeds of tyranny began to sprout. The first truly chilling act was the destruction of Persepolis, the magnificent ceremonial capital of the Persian Empire. For over 200 years, it was the jewel of Persia, a symbol of its power and grandeur. After looting its vast treasuries in May of 330 BCE, Alexander ordered the great palace complex burned to the ground. Why? The ancient sources can't agree. Was it a calculated act of state policy, a final dramatic act of revenge for the Persian burning of Athens 150 years earlier? Or was it, as other sources claim, a wild, drunken party foul? They describe a banquet where a courtesan suggested it as a bit of fun, and a heavily intoxicated Alexander and his friends grabbed torches and set fire to the magnificent structures in a fit of alcoholic madness. Whether it was a cold political act or drunken vandalism, the result was the same: a catastrophic loss of cultural heritage. The man tutored by Aristotle, the supposed champion of civilization, had just torched one of its great centers. As Alexander pushed deeper into modern-day Afghanistan and Central Asia, his behavior grew more erratic and paranoid. The war here was a brutal, grinding guerrilla campaign, and it was taking its toll. This paranoia came to a head in the case of Philotas, a high-ranking commander and son of Parmenion, Alexander's most senior general. Philotas was accused of failing to report a plot against Alexander's life. Under torture, he confessed. Alexander had him executed. But he didn't stop there. Fearing the father might one day avenge the son, he sent assassins to murder Parmenion. The old general, a man instrumental in all of Alexander's victories, was killed before he even knew his son was dead. It was a shocking moment that showed no one was safe from the king's suspicion. At the same time, Alexander began adopting Persian customs. He wore their robes, adopted their court ceremonies, and married a Bactrian noblewoman, Roxana. Strategically, this was a smart move. To rule a multicultural empire, he needed to blend cultures and win over the Persian elite. But to his own Macedonian soldiers, it was deeply unsettling. They had followed him to destroy the Persian Empire, not to watch their king become a Persian himself. The final straw for many was proskynesis, the Persian ritual of prostrating oneself before the king. To Persians, it was a sign of respect, but to Greeks, you only did that for a god. Asking a Greek to perform proskynesis to a mortal man was blasphemy. Alexander tried to introduce it, but his Macedonians fiercely resisted, creating a deep rift between the king and his men. This simmering tension, this clash of cultures, and Alexander's own volatility finally exploded in one of the most infamous episodes of his life: the murder of Cleitus the Black. It happened in 328 BCE. Cleitus was a veteran of his father's army and the man who had personally saved Alexander's life at the Battle of the Granicus. During a lavish, wine-soaked banquet, flatterers began comparing Alexander to gods, belittling his father Philip's achievements in the process. Cleitus, fiercely loyal to Philip's memory, got angry. Drunk and belligerent, he started shouting, reminding everyone of the veteran's importance and pointing out that Alexander owed him his life. The argument escalated. Alexander, already drunk and paranoid, flew into a violent rage. His friends tried to restrain him and rush Cleitus out of the room, but as Alexander broke free, Cleitus stubbornly came back in, still shouting. Alexander snatched a spear from a guard and ran him through, killing him instantly. The moment it was done, Alexander's fury vanished, replaced by crushing remorse. He had just murdered the man who saved his life. He reportedly tried to turn the spear on himself, but was stopped by his bodyguards. He then locked himself away for 3 days, refusing food and water, wailing in grief and self-loathing. The murder of Cleitus was a point of no return. It laid bare the terrifying darkness within a king so isolated by power that he could kill a friend for speaking the truth. After subduing Persia, Alexander's ambition, his pathos and insatiable longing remained. He turned his gaze east, towards the legendary land of India. In 327 BCE, he led his army into the Punjab Valley, a new world with new kingdoms and a terrifying new weapon: war elephants. His biggest challenge came from King Porus, whose army, anchored by 200 war elephants, was wading across the swollen Hydaspes River. The Battle of the Hydaspes in 326 BCE would be Alexander's last great battle, and one of his most brilliant. A direct assault was suicidal, so for days, Alexander feinted crossings, keeping Porus's army on edge. Then, under the cover of a fierce thunderstorm, he led a large force 17 miles upstream and crossed the river. The battle that followed was savage. The war elephants crashed into the Macedonian phalanx, trampling men and grabbing them with their trunks. But Alexander adapted. He had his archers target the elephants' handlers. Without their guides, the wounded beasts panicked, running amok and crashing back into their own lines. Alexander used his superior cavalry to surround Porus's army, sealing a complete, if costly, victory. King Porus, who fought bravely until the end, was captured and brought before Alexander. "How do you wish to be treated?" Alexander asked. "Like a king," Porus replied. Impressed, Alexander not only let Porus keep his kingdom but added more territory to it, making him a loyal ally. It was a moment that showcased Alexander at his most magnanimous. But the battle had taken a heavy psychological toll. His men had been campaigning for 8 years, marching thousands of miles. They were exhausted and homesick. Now they heard rumors of what lay further east: the vast Nanda Empire, with an army many times the size of Porus's, fielding thousands more elephants. For the soldiers, this was the final straw. They had conquered the Persian Empire and were rich beyond their wildest dreams. The thought of marching on was simply too much. At the banks of the Hyphasis River, the army finally mutinied. It wasn't violent, just a quiet, stubborn refusal. Alexander, in disbelief, gave one of the most famous speeches of his career. He reminded them of their glory, their riches, and the immortal fame that awaited. He cajoled, he promised, he threatened. But this time, his charisma failed him. Finally, Conus, a loyal senior general, stepped forward to speak for the men. He spoke respectfully of their exhaustion, their longing for home, their dwindling numbers. Moderation in the midst of success, O king, is the noblest of things, he pleaded. The soldiers roared their approval. Alexander was enraged. He stormed off to his tent and sulked for 3 days, expecting his men to relent. They didn't. The army stood its ground. On the 4th day, a defeated Alexander emerged, announcing that the sacrifices to the gods were unfavorable for crossing. He saved face. They would turn back. He had conquered kings and empires, but he could not conquer the will of his own men. The journey home was a long and arduous ordeal. Instead of retracing his steps, Alexander chose a new, even more difficult route, leading his main force overland through the Gedrosian Desert, a vast, barren wasteland. It was a catastrophic decision. For 60 days, his army struggled through the scorching, waterless landscape. Thousands of men, women, and children in the army's train died from heat, exhaustion, and thirst. It was a horrific and seemingly pointless sacrifice, a disaster born from a leader whose pride had become dangerously detached from reality. After the horrors of the desert, Alexander returned to the heart of his empire. Finding it rife with corruption, he acted swiftly, executing several corrupt governors. He settled in Babylon and began to lay new plans for the conquest of Arabia and North Africa. His ambition was still boundless. He also pushed his policy of cultural fusion to its most dramatic conclusion. In 324 BCE at Susa, he staged a mass marriage, ordering 80 of his senior officers and 10,000 of his soldiers to take Persian wives, even offering dowries to encourage them. It was his ultimate attempt to literally merge the two cultures, but many Macedonians saw it as a betrayal. This resentment boiled over one last time at Opis. When Alexander announced his plan to discharge his aging Macedonian veterans, the army mutinied again, believing he was casting them aside for his new Persian soldiers. This time, Alexander's response was a masterclass in psychological warfare. He had the ringleaders arrested and executed on the spot. Then, he delivered a powerful, emotional speech, not of glory, but of their shared history. He then dismissed them all, announcing he would form a new army of Persians. Shamed and horrified, the Macedonians waited outside his palace for 2 days before breaking down and begging for his forgiveness. He had broken their pride and reasserted his absolute authority one last time. But the king, who had survived countless battles, was not immortal. In June of 323 BCE, after a long drinking party, Alexander fell ill with a fever. 10 days later, he was dead. He was just 32 years old. When asked on his deathbed to whom he left his kingdom, he is said to have whispered, "To the strongest." Whether he said it or not, it's exactly what happened. His vast empire immediately became the prize in a 50-year war between his top generals. The unified world he had forged shattered. So, how do we weigh his legacy? On one hand, there's Alexander the Visionary. His conquests ushered in the Hellenistic age. For 300 years, Greek culture, language, and philosophy spread across the Middle East, creating a vibrant, cosmopolitan world. He founded more than 20 cities in his name, with Alexandria in Egypt becoming the intellectual capital of the Mediterranean. These cities became hubs of trade and learning, fostering a remarkable fusion of Greek, Egyptian, Persian, and Indian ideas. In this view, Alexander was a vehicle of progress who broke down the barriers between East and West. On the other hand, there is the undeniable case for Alexander the ruthless king. This legacy is written in blood and ash. The human cost of his conquests was staggering. with estimates of the dead running into the hundreds of thousands. Entire populations in cities like Thebes and Tyre were slaughtered or sold into slavery. His civilizing mission often meant annihilation for those who resisted. He ordered mass executions and crucifixions that would be classified as war crimes today. The burning of Persepolis was an act of cultural vandalism. His personal behavior devolved into paranoia and tyranny, leading him to murder loyal veterans and close friends. From this perspective, he was a megalomaniac whose ambition inflicted immense suffering on the world. So, conqueror or ruthless king? Hero or villain? The truth is, he was all of these things. Alexander was a man of profound and disturbing contradictions, a military genius of unparalleled skill and a paranoid tyrant capable of shocking cruelty. He was both a creator and a destroyer, a unifier and a butcher. To judge him solely by modern ethics is tricky. He lived in a brutal age. Yet even by the standards of his own time, his actions were often seen as extreme. He cannot be easily sanitized or condemned. His legacy is a complex tapestry woven with threads of brilliant gold and blood red. He pushed the world into a new era, but he did so at the point of a spear. He connected cultures, but he extinguished others. Ultimately, the debate over Alexander forces us to ask if great achievements can ever justify horrific means. Does one man's vision outweigh the suffering of those who stand in his way? He remains, as he was in life, a figure of both awe and terror, a conqueror who reshaped the world, leaving a legacy as brilliant and as brutal as the man himself. What do you think was his defining legacy? Was he a hero who dragged the world forward, or a villain whose ambition left an indelible scar? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more deep dives into history's most complex figures.